Null Sector is an Omnic liberation front that utilizes violent methods to achieve their goals. Its forces are almost entirely comprised of robotic drones manufactured in Omniums, and all this is done under the control of Ramattra, one of Null Sector's original founding members and currently its only leader. Where they see themselves fighting for Omnic rights and a group of freedom fighters, the rest of the world sees them as violent terrorists. After the Omnic Crisis, Omnic abuse was on a tremendous rise, with most of humanity not accepting Omnics into human society. Most Omnics would fight back in secrecy, but it wasn't until Ramattra came along that they all found unity. Ramattra managed to inspire others and gain a tremendous underground following of many hurt and angry Omnics. Null Sector was originally formed by Ramattra, but he also had some comrades called Nameless, Lynette, and Zera. At the very start, Ramattra first focused on building loyalty, but true radicalization and militarization were not far behind. And before the violent methods came around, Ramattra was an advocate for coexistence with humanity, following a lot of teachings of the Iris and the Shambali monks. But after failing again and again, he deemed that coexistence with humanity wasn't possible. And since he was aware that Omnic numbers were dwindling all across the globe, he decided he was going to lead a better future for his people by force. The name Null Sector was chosen on purpose. Humans had given Omnics numbers to define them as, whereas Null Sector would be undefined in the eyes of their human creators. However, at the start, Null Sector was extremely small, and it wasn't really treated as a threat by any of the major world authorities. But that would all change in London. Ramattra and his allies would arrive in an Omnium created by Anubis during the crisis. There, Ramattra activated the abandoned assembly lines and produced a horde of robots for Null Sector to use. Despite the disagreements from his allies, Ramattra would reassure them that unlike Omnics, these robots were usable and expendable, despite their outdated models, in which they would proceed with the plan with the uprising in London. After stirring a bit of unrest in London, Null Sector launched the King's Row Uprising. After 27 days of this uprising, the UK Prime Minister would continue to forbid any Overwatch activity from taking place within the area. But by this point, Null Sector had already taken the mayor, Vendetta, and 100 other prisoners in a guarded power plant. There were thousands in King's Row that needed medical aid, as Null Sector rampaged through King's Row. Blackwatch agent Cole Cassidy would be sent to the area by Gabriel Reyes without telling anyone, in which Cole would report the situation to Strike Commander Morrison, who wouldn't be so pleased with Gabriel. After giving it some thought, Jack Morrison authorized an illegal Overwatch mission to end the uprising in King's Row, in which 4 Overwatch agents, Tracer, Reinhardt, Torbjorn, and Mercy, touched down in King's Row and fought their way through hordes of Omnics to end the uprising. 2 days after the uprising, Ramattra was infuriated that Omnics and Mondada of the Shambali monks condemned Null Sector as a terrorist organization. During this uprising, also, one of Ramattra's allies, Lynette, died in combat. And after seeing how far their friend was willing to go, Nameless and Zera would abandon Null Sector and leave it to Ramattra to lead alone. After this uprising, Null Sector would go underground and wouldn't be seen for many years. After being underground for many years, Null Sector would make the return in Paris. Null Sector were coming back even stronger this time, with brand new robot forces and updated models. This attack on Paris was one that the French police were hard pressed to stop, and since Overwatch had been shut down by this point, there was no real true force in the world that was able to put an end to them. And that was until an Overwatch team consisting of Tracer, Winston, and May would arrive at the scene to help with evacuations. But something the Overwatch team had not anticipated was the arrival of a Titan.
Take cover!
Now heavily outnumbered and outgunned, it seemed like Null Sector were going to put an end to Overwatch once and for all. However, the tide was turned when, Reinhardt and Genji and Mercy and Echo and who else showed up? Brigitte, who were able to fend off Null Sector and defeat the Titan. Not long after Paris, however, Null Sector would attack Busan, in which they deployed thousands of warbots to the city via drop pods. During this, the Mecha Squad was deployed to take care of the city, as well as taking down the command carrier, dropping all these pods. If it had not been for the arrival of Overwatch member Cole Cassidy, dude, he's just like so good. He's just like everywhere he needs to be, and everywhere he needs to be, they got on great. He's so cool, isn't he, Sophie? Yep. And with this, Null Sector was repelled once again, with the ground forces destroyed and the carrier forced to retreat. However, this was just the beginning. Despite being defeated in Paris and Busan, Null Sector would go on to launch a global scale attack, with Ramattra hacking into broadcast systems all across the globe to deliver this message.
My fellow Omnics, do not be afraid. This is not war. This is liberation. Since our creation, humans have oppressed us. You have lived in fear. That ends now. We will shatter the chains that have held you in servitude. This marks a new era, one of equality, of unity. Conflict and strife will be relics of the past. Together, working as one, we will lift our people. Together, of one mind and purpose, we will make this world a paradise. The humans will fight us. Change frightens them. We frighten them. They believe we are not their equals. Together, we will prove them wrong. Do not betray your fellow Omnics by defending injustice. Join us. Take your place at our side. Only together will our strength manifest. Only as one will we ascend. We welcome you into the Iris.
The world's militaries were quickly overwhelmed, and the world began to descend into chaos. Millions would be affected by this war, and Null Sector would begin to abduct Omnics, where they would deploy devices to save Omnic consciousness for a new nation being built. After Paris and Busan, Null Sector would attack places like Zurich, Buenos Aires, and the Atlantic Arcology. A battle of note, though, is the Battle of Numbani. A year after stopping Doomfist, Orisa and Ify had now established themselves as proper heroes of the city, and a day after the invasion of Paris, Numbani became a target for Null Sector. As the attack went on, Ify tried to contact Orisa, due to the two being separated after a small argument. I'm pretty sure Orisa was just jealous because Ify was making a small robot called Junie, which is in fact what happened. Orisa was jealous and feared that Ify was replacing her with Junie. However, moving on, Ify was unable to contact Orisa as the attack was taking place, due to Null Sector already cutting off all communication. While Ify was trying to save citizens of Numbani, she was almost captured by Null Sector forces, but escaped the crisis thanks to Mr. Parkour, who she was close with. They would take refuge in Cafe Kopi Aromo, where they saw a strange machine being placed on an Omnic's head. As this happened, propaganda broadcasts from the unknown OR-7000 Ravager unit began appearing on all holograms in the cafe. Refugees who watched such broadcasts came to the conclusion that Null Sector didn't understand what Numbani was. Since Numbani is a safe haven for Omnics and humans to live in coexistence together, they couldn't understand why Null Sector was attacking here. At that moment, the walls of the cafe was completely destroyed, and the Omnics with the strange devices on their head were dragged away by Null Sector troops. The citizens of Numbani tried to fight back with weapons of their own, but this wasn't enough. Luckily at this time, Orisa shows up and destroys the Null troopers. Then Ify and Orisa would go on to help anyone they could see in the city, as well as the defense forces of Numbani. The city had turned into a battlefield. As the battle continued on, as damage accumulated, and as casualties grew, Ify decided to infect the Zuni, possessed by most citizens in Numbani, with a virus she had created, which gave Ify complete control over all of them. About 300 Zuni, the city's defense forces, and Orisa would aggressively expand their front line in defense against these Null Sector troops, and in the end, Numbani was defended by Orisa, Ify, and all the citizens who helped in the fight. Since Numbani is a city where humans and Omnics coexist, this is what made it a large target for Null Sector. Not long after Paris, another battle would be taking place across the world. Null Sector would invade Las Vegas, and this attack was swift and sudden, with the Las Vegas Strip taking heavy damage. Upon landing, Null Sector's forces would fan out throughout the Strip, going into the hotels and casinos to liberate Omnics through their neural suppressors, with humans either being ignored or executed. executed. As well as this, communications were cut off to the outside world, and 22 hours after the initial attack, the city was effectively taken with very little human resistance. Another battle that took place was the Battle of Rio, where Null Sector launched a full force attack. As a command ship hovered above the city, Null Sector forces began their attack on the ground. Lucio, alongside a newly deployed Overwatch team, fought their way through the streets of Rio in order to get to the command ship. In the end of this battle, the command ship was effectively destroyed, and Null Sector was repelled once again. Another one of its major targets was the city of Toronto. Its forces began attacking humans and abducting Omnics that hadn't already gone rogue. This attack on Toronto was made to demonstrate that humans had treated Omnics as servants for far too long. Null Sector took control of the city and quickly began rounding up Omnics for liberation. Many Null Sector bots were deployed to the area, such as stalkers and subjugators, and it was only a small portion of the Omnic population that ended up surviving this battle. A majority of the Omnics that were in the Toronto stadium survived due to an Overwatch team being deployed to the area. Null Sector also attacked King's Row once again, where eventually they were repelled by Overwatch. There was also the Battle of Lijiang, where Wrecking Ball was present, oddly enough. He was there to get some anti-gravity device for the Junker Queen, but virtually Lijiang had been completely and virtually emptied as many of its people evacuated. So Null Sector troopers were basically just roaming a empty space. There were some Lucheng security guards at Lijiang Tower, but they just stayed where they are and paid no mind to the Omnic invasion, since it was none of their business. There was also the Battle of Tokyo, where Kiriko and Hanzo were present. After Hanzo had been captured by the Hashimoto and freed by Kiriko, the two helped fight their way through the streets of Tokyo, freeing any refugees from the Hashimoto and returning to Kanezaka. Tokyo would fall to Null Sector, with the only safe space being Kanezaka, which was under the protection of Kiriko and Hanzo. There was also the Battle of Chengdu, where Null Sector attacked at the Rujing College. Students of the university were deployed to the battlefield until the army were able to arrive, with the Fire College helping on the front lines, and the Water College students being in charge of Med Bay. Upon hearing that Anran was still on the battlefield, Wu Yang would head there himself, with the two teaming up to dispatch of any Null Sector forces until the army could arrive the next day. In the end, Null Sector was repelled by Overwatch, thus ending its invasion. But Overwatch were only able to rescue 0.8% of the Omnics captured, while Null Sector remained with 99.2% of Omnics subjugated. Null Sector is a very interesting group, I feel, since most of the world views them as terrorists, but they're also fighting for a just cause. See, Ramattra and Null Sector believe that Omnics are being killed and abused worldwide, and the only way to free them and save them is through these violent means. Whereas places like Numbani actually serve as safe havens for humans and Omnics to coexist. But when you look deeper into Ramattra and Null Sector, it makes it very hard to sit here and be like, yeah, I want Overwatch to win. And Ramattra is honestly one of the main reasons I can't wait to see Null Sector return. As we do know, they are sitting and waiting for the next phase of their plan and what they're doing with the subjugated Omnics. So I am highly looking forward to seeing what's in store for Ramattra and seeing his character make a return in the Overwatch lore. Ramattra has been abandoned. Welcome back to the channel. Now today I want to talk about my guy, my favorite revolutionary, Ramattra, once again. Before we get into it though, make sure you check out the Ramattra lore videos and all the other videos in the lore playlist. But what do I mean by Ramattra has been abandoned? Well, first of all, let me just get it out of the way by saying I'm being a little bit dramatic. Ramattra hasn't been abandoned. Well, not that we know of. But now with Vendetta coming out soon and the wrapping up of the invasion storyline, there isn't really much for Ramattra to do anymore. His place in the story has kind of just been written off, which is a damn shame because Ramattra is the best written character in this game. Other characters that would come close to him are Reinhardt or Sigma, and it's a shame to see that his story, this thing that was building up for so long in Overwatch 2, has now finished on a really anticlimactic end. As we know, the announcement of this sort of finishing of this story was with the Atlas News Report short story, and this was a really, I'm going to say, bad ending to something that could have been so great. And not only now is Ramattra's story sort of being finished. Well, again, by the looks of it, it's being finished. Who knows, further down the line, they could bring out a new storyline involving Ramattra, maybe have a little redemption arc or something, I don't know. But as for now, this is the end of Ramatra's story. It ends with his invasion being pushed back and a meeting with Zenyatta that hints at something bigger on the way, but who knows how long we'll have to wait until we get it. Again, I am being completely dramatic in saying this, and I know he is going to have more story down the line. He said so in the comic, and even in the Atlas report, we see that they retreat with all subjugated Omnics so that the next part of Ramatra's plan can come to fruition. And as much as I would love to see, or would have loved to see, the Ramatra storyline progress through the game, through PvE, I don't think Overwatch 2 as a game is suited for a story mode. I can't see a Ramattra boss fight in game being entertaining, being fun, being cool. All I can imagine it being is a Ramattra AI bot placed in a room that plays exactly like that, plays as just another Ramattra player AI bot. So on one hand, I am really glad that PvE was cancelled and we didn't get anything worse than what we had gotten, but also I do think that Ramatra's storyline and just this era of Overwatch deserves its own animated show, whether it be done like the cinematics, whether it be done in a 2D sort of anime style, whether it be done like Arcane. I just want to see this character and his story progressed in some way that feels justified, that does his character right, because it is a really big shame that a character like this is stuck in a game like Overwatch. And that's not me saying I don't like Overwatch or Overwatch is bad, it's just the way the story and progression of that story has gone over the years. It's just really gone downhill. And this universe, Overwatch's universe, is so big. It's got so many new storylines. It's got so many characters. I would be insanely shocked if there isn't some place in Blizzard that isn't pushing for Overwatch to get its own show, because I would love to see it. I would love to see Ramattra on screen, all cinematic and stuff, doing some mad shit, man. We already know from the Transformers collab trailer that you can animate Ramattra doing some pretty sick combat. So I would love to see this game get some sort of animated show, to see Ramattra get the story told that he deserves, because it really is a shame. Sorry, I'm about to go on a tangent here. I'm coming back in after already recording all the audio for this video, and I just rewatched the Transformers collaboration trailer, and oh my god, why don't we have an Overwatch cinematic series that is done like this? This proves that you can make Overwatch and all its stuff, put it into a different form of media and make it so cool. If just they invested the time and effort to just like hire a studio to make them something, oh my god, it would be so peak if this was an actual Overwatch animated series, that we had fight scenes like this. It would be so incredibly peak. You don't understand, or maybe you do understand. It's just, there's so much that could be done with Ramattra. There's so much that could be done with Ramattra, that this is the way it has gone. Again, now I might be being dramatic here by saying Ramattra has been written off or been abandoned, but it really does feel like he got the short end of the stick. It feels like Ramattra was built up to be this insanely pivotal character in Overwatch and then was just wasted, was purely wasted. I remember when he launched, it was the Overwatch World Cup, I'm pretty sure, was when he was announced, and they announced the statue and they showed his origin story, and I remember thinking to myself, this is probably one of the coolest characters they've ever done. And he was so pivotal to the plot. He was the main, I don't want to say antagonist, but the main character. And I don't know if they meant to have him like that, but he really did feel like he was the main character. It felt like the story had been building up to him, whereas before Null Sector was this just Omnic terrorist organization that was wreaking havoc for the sake of wreaking havoc. But then when Ramattra came out and all his lore came out, it really solidified that Ramattra is fighting for a good cause. And we've seen Omnic injustice all over the place in Overwatch, well before Ramattra, in Soldier 76's cinematic, in one of the trailers for Overwatch with Reinhardt protecting the Omnics from being hit with a Molotov. So when Ramattra came out, it felt very justified. And now it feels like Ramattra has just been wasted. An amazing storyline that, if done well, could be one of the greatest, but because of a lack of care for Ramattra, or just wanting to move on from the PvE shithouse and wanting to just move on, or thinking that they can't go anywhere else with it, because I don't know, maybe the only situation was just to have Overwatch beat back Null Sector once again. Maybe they're afraid to let Ramattra win, I don't know. Or if it really is just to make way for Vendetta, because Vendetta is this new villain who has ties to Talon, and is more antagonistic towards both Talon and Overwatch, whereas Ramattra isn't really a villain. And maybe they realize that. Maybe they realize they made Ramattra too likable of a bad guy. They made him too sympathetic. So they just want to kind of put him on the side and actually have someone who people can root against. Have someone who people can actually hate as a bad guy and get behind as a bad guy. Because if my Ramattra videos are anything to show, a lot of people agree with the sentiment that Ramattra is not a villain. He's not this big bad guy who's, trying to just wreak havoc, rule the world. He's this put down Omnic whose race has been put down at the same time, and he's fighting for the right to exist just like everyone else. So maybe that's why they're moving on. Maybe that's why, or maybe it's just because Vendetta's this hot new villain they can put in the game, make skins of, so they can just, I don't know, she'll promote them better or something. I don't know. I'm just salty because it really does feel like Ramattra has just been abandoned, and it really does suck. And even in game, I really wish Ramattra got some more love in game. I really hope Season 21 yields a mythic skin or a mythic weapon for Ramattra, because he's been highly requested to get a mythic and just haven't seen any love going towards him. But again, Kiriko getting all the love she does, and Mercy and Juno and Reaper and Reinhardt. It's crazy. And don't get me wrong, Ramattra doesn't have all bad skins. His Epion and Megatron skin are really cool. I don't know though. I wish you were to get a mythic or something like that. Because I mean, the original three characters of Overwatch 2, Junker Queen, Sojourner, and Kiriko, all now have mythic skins. Lifeweaver has a mythic skin. I think it's about time Ramattra gets one as well. But knowing this game, before you know it, Wu Yang, Juno has a mythic already. Juno got a mythic. Like a year after she came out? Not even. So yeah, before you know it, probably Wu Yang will get a skin. Freya and Vendetta will probably get their stuff well before Ramattra does. Which is kind of sad to think about, because Ramattra does deserve more, and it is a damn shame that a character so good as this is trapped in this game. But I'm gonna stop my little rant. I'm gonna stop complaining about Ramattra not getting enough, and Ramattra this, Ramattra that. Zenyatta is one of the most mysterious characters in Overwatch, but also a favourite of many. He is insanely cool with his Orbs of Destruction, Orbs of Discord and Harmony, and an incredibly iconic ultimate. His story starts before the Omnic Crisis, when he was made. Although he makes many claims to what he did before the Crisis, none are verified to be true, and he states his memories before the Awakening were blurry. After the crisis, however, Zenyatta was recruited into the Shambali monastery by Ramattra, who hoped that Zenyatta could find purpose with the Shambali as he had. The two became as close as brothers and spent years discussing the problems facing Omnics, including the injustices being committed by humans. The two sat up at night, counting stars, wondering how many Omnics were doing the same. At some point, however, Ramattra committed an action that nearly resulted in Zenyatta's death. After Ramattra founded Null Sector, he and Zenyatta ceased all contact. After the fall of Overwatch, while still in the Shambali monastery, Zenyatta encountered Genji, who had left Overwatch and was conflicted with his nature as a cyborg. Struggling with his humanity, Genji initially rejected Zenyatta's wisdom. The benevolent Omnic would not be deterred though. In time, Zenyatta became his mentor, and under the monk's tutelage, Genji reconciled his dual existence as both man and machine, as Zenyatta helped his students see both his trials and his cybernetic form as a unique strength. Zenyatta would go on to consider Genji to be one of his brightest pupils. After Genji left his tutelage, Zenyatta began to see the limits of the Shambali path. He believed the way to repair the problems between humans and Omnics was not through dogmatic teaching, but through interpersonal connection and engagement. Genji and Zenyatta would also spend Christmas together, a nice little moment we get to see in the Christmas comic. Ultimately though, Zenyatta followed his own path. He chose to leave the monastery and wander the world, helping those he meets to overcome their personal struggles and find inner peace. Zenyatta was on a pilgrimage in Suravasa, intending to reflect on Mandata's teachings. At the same time the Vishkar Corporation were breaking ground, it caused a tremor that destroyed the statue of Aurora in a temple. Later, inside the temple, he met with Vishkar agent Satya Vaswani, who had come on Vishkar's behalf. He told her that it was good that Vishkar was taking responsibility for the damage they caused, but it would mean nothing if the help they provided wasn't constructive. He offered her lodging at the temple so they may understand the community a little better and the temple's faith. She agreed to stay, and he guided her through the temple, also informing her of Aurora's history. A week after Vaswani's arrival, she and Zenyatta walked into the temple's courtyard, where they met with Sarpanch Ranesh Gurwal. I think I'm saying that right. Along with a crowd of priests, pilgrims, villagers and Vishkar personnel. She revealed that she had to use hard light to fix the shrine, giving it a new luminescence. After the event, she met Zenyatta outside, who gave her incense as a parting gift, telling her that she is always welcome. To Sanjay Korpal of Vishkar, he stated, "Every dawn brings a new chance to choose our paths. I hope Vishkar Corporation sees that now." And the last thing we know about him is his meeting with Ramattra at the statue of Mandata in King's Row. The two talk about Ramatra's goals, his convictions, the death of their master Mandata, and how Zenyatta still wishes to fight for the good of the world and stand by Omnics and humanity. A very touching reunion of two brothers that had both chosen to follow separate paths and fight for their people in the way they believe. Very Charles Xavier and Magneto, I have to say. Now, you might be wondering, we're only a few minutes into this video, but that is all. So my biggest question is, why does Zenyatta have such little lore? Being one of the original 21 heroes, you'd think he'd be fleshed out a little more, no? This has been a question within the Overwatch community for years now, that Zenyatta has been so underdeveloped lore-wise. Very little is known about him, and he has an even smaller mention in the story. With PvE, we were finally going to see him in action, but we all know how that turned out. There are so many interesting paths they could take for Zenyatta that is unreal how neglected he has been. Hope is looking up though with the release of the Ramattra comic. Hopefully we get more like that. It would be nice to see them delve into Zenyatta and Ramattra's relationship a little more, or even more moments with Genji. Maybe a comic or a little cinematic about Zenyatta teaching Genji, the struggles Genji was going through and how difficult it would have been to keep Genji on a steady path. Showing this could really help build the character of Zenyatta, and also showing more touching moments with Ramattra it could really help us understand the relationship between the two brothers on a much more deeper level. I really wish there was more to Zenyatta. He is so incredibly cool, with his ult voice line being so iconic. A very mysterious character indeed, as we don't know much about how he even works, how his orbs work, how he stays floating. Why is that man floating? But perhaps that is to remain a mystery. I really hate to cut this video here, but there really is not a lot to talk about when it comes to Zenyatta. I wish there was more story to him. I wish he was a little more fleshed out. Maybe they want to keep him sort of mysterious and have his past clouded in shadow. But I do have to leave this video here, as there, again, is not much to talk about when it comes to Zenyatta. Gameplay wise, I really enjoy playing him, and his addition to Stadium was really fun. It actually makes personally playing the support role even more fun in that game mode. As the granddaughter of Vishwar Karma Bot, who formed an ambitious startup, Farah grew up for a taste for the finer things in life. From early on, she had immense pressure put on her by her family to inherit the family business, and it was this pressure from her family that turned her into a perfectionist and a shrewd negotiator. She excelled in all lessons of debate and economics and had a natural skill for corporate politics. However, where she exceeded in all of this, she lacked the creative eye that Vishkar needed, the artistic eye required to be a Vishkar architect. Wanting to present as flawless, she invested a fortune in private lessons and custom assistive technology that allowed her to compete with even the most prestigious Vishkar architects. Ultimately, this led to her perfecting her appearance of effortlessness with a practical and diligent professional masquerading as a natural born talent. Once she was old enough, she insisted on starting her career outside the family business in an attempt to perfect her negotiation skills and also to refine her image to prove herself to be worthy of inheriting the family mantle. Still determined to work in Vishkar, she transferred from private equity to the technology sector, weaponizing her drive, intelligence, and charm to dominate the corporate ladder. Eventually, she worked her way up and secured herself a spot on the Vishkar board. Some say it was nepotism or bribery that got her here, but her unquestionable intellect and unparalleled negotiation skills made her a great asset to the company. With her oversight, Vishkar won a bid for reconstruction efforts in Rio de Janeiro, leading her to take the position of Vice President of Operations and Development in the company. As she continued her corporate climb, she formed various relationships and funded her own projects, all to take Vishkar and herself to new heights. Now, before we move on to any more of Domina, I want to go back and just talk about Vishkar and what Vishkar really is. Now, Vishkar was started before the Omnic Crisis. Now, as I mentioned before, Vishkar was an ambitious startup. Research was slow but promising, and the United Nations Global Recovery Program provided additional funding. But this led this startup turning into a corporation proper, and Vera's granddad hoped to share it with the world before Vishkar implemented more restrictions to the technology. And unfortunately, Vishwar Karma lost his life in an unfortunate car accident 1 year before Vishkar's public offering. However, the company was strong to withstand the loss of its leader and even thrive in his absence. However, his idealistic corporate policy would die with him, and Vishkar's hard light research was well received, but its expansion into poorer regions resulted these nations in going into debt to Vishkar, with many of them seeing Vishkar's actions as predatory. And then after the Omnic Crisis, Vishkar began the laborious process of creating new self-sustaining cities to house India's displaced population, one of them being Utopia, which was created using radical hard light technology that enabled Vishkar's architects to shape the city's streets, facilities, living spaces in the blink of an eye. And then when Vishkar secured the contract to rebuild Rio, the citizens were told that Vishkar would improve their lives. However, that promise never became a reality. You see, Vishkar imposed controls on these residents in the name of building a more orderly society, which led to Vishkar enforcing curfews, cracking down on what the company perceived as unlawful behavior, and exploiting the populace as a cheap labor force. Sonic technology was developed to help keep these citizens in line. However, this technology was stolen by one of the citizens, who then led to an uprising against Vishkar. Which eventually led to Vishkar being drove out of the city. So as we can kind of see, Vishkar not great, because they are also trying to steal Biolight from Lifeweaver. To quickly go over what Biolight is, Biolight was created by Lifeweaver using the original idea for a hard light designed by Vishkar Karma, and then incorporating his own fascination with botany. Lifeweaver created Biolight, an organic material that could heal wounds in seconds, and Lifeweaver wanted to share this invention with the world, but Vishkar didn't like that idea. You see, Vishkar determined that Biolight was made on Vishkar property, on Vishkar time, therefore it belongs to Vishkar, whereas Lifeweaver disagrees. So Vishkar aren't that great. But let's move back to Domina. Now, Domina meets with a very prominent figure in the Overwatch story by this point, and that is Marcia Bartolotti, better known as Vendetta. Marcia Bartolotti contracted Vishkar in hopes of forming a partnership, but demanded that someone more competent than their previous envoy, and so Vera stepped up as Vishkar's most efficient negotiator. The two were set to meet on Marcia's turf, the Colosseo, to discuss their partnership. Vera arrived late, but had time to place a bet on Chloea, a fresh competitor in the arena. With her elegant posture and effortless grace, Vera carried herself with confidence, being statuesque and impeccably dressed. To begin their negotiations, they started off by relating to each other, their willingness to break rules, to form their own. Marcia then proceeded to bring up previous negotiations she had made with Vishkar, and the insulting proposals made, to which Vera smiled and remarked on her attitude. Marcia then continued by revealing what she knew about Vishkar. Does she know the truth? Their construction in Suravasa, inciting an uprising in Rio. A runaway architect. Marcia was threatening Vishkar, something Vera would not let slide. Vera complimented Marcia regarding the research she'd gathered on the company, and noted her attention to detail, so she wanted to figure out what Marcia actually wanted. Marcia replied with an opportunity to form a partnership. Marcia would provide Vishkar with exclusive redevelopment contracts and rights to redevelop communities affected by Marcia's war, which would then help fix Vishkar's reputation. In turn, Marcia expected Vera's loyalty and Vishkar's investment in her. Vera complimented her ability to threaten Vishkar and offer business propositions in the same breath, stating that Vendetta lives up to her reputation, whereas Marcia responded that she is her reputation, to which Vera responded that Vishkar is hers. Vera defined the details of this negotiation, stating that success was Vera's to claim and failure would fall on Marcia, to which both would agree to terms. Soon after, Marcia would defeat Doomfist and take lead of Talon, and when this happened, Vera began working closely with Marcia from Vishkar, despite Sanjay Corporal remaining at Talon to act as the company's envoy. Upon their agreement, Vera started developing hardlight technology and augmentations for Talon. So far, she had provided Talon troops with standard issue shielding, saved the very best from Marcia's gladiators. Instead, they would be equipped with intelligent shielding, programmed to adapt to the gladiators' fighting style. And when news broke of Talon's devastating strike on Watchpoint Gibraltar, Vera did not express concern for the victims of a newly reformed Overwatch, but seeing this attack as an opportunity for new business, recognizing that an ensuing global panic would create a massive power vacuum, one that made way for her to position herself and Vishkar as the stable, visionary leaders the world desperately needed in the wake of Talon's aggression. And then moving on, while preparing to deliver a speech at the Vishkar Awards for excellence in reimagining architectural applications, Vera reviewed a draft written for her and was thoroughly devastated. The speechwriter had heavily focused on her family and her family's connections, and offered effusive praise for Vishkar's architects. This infuriated Vera, who felt her own relentless drive, personal funding, and unmatched negotiation skills were the backbone of the company's success, rather than innate talent of her grandfather's legacy. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Vera would speak her own mind out aloud, reflecting on a painful memory of her family cruelly rejecting her imperfect attempts at hard-light manipulation. She had to rely on her wealth and intense dedication to master the craft, ultimately deciding that the art of shaping an untouchable image was far more valuable than raw artistic talent. However, upon catching a glimpse of her vulnerable, aging, stressed reflection in the mirror, she realized that sharing her authentic struggles would only cost her her public reputation. Choosing to give the people the flawless icon they expected buried her insecurities. She would confidently take the stage, ignoring her attendant and leaving her true, flawed self behind. Domina is one of the best characters added to this game by far, and I don't mean that in a way of her story is incredibly deep or her impact on the story has been incredible so far, because to be honest, she hasn't had an insane impact on the story as of yet, and that's obviously more to come, and I honestly can't wait because I really like Domina as a character purely because of how relatable Domina is. In the Picture of Success comic, we get a look at Domina's insecure side, how Domina acts when she's alone, and it's very relatable. All her hard work, her dedication, her drive being completely overlooked in favor of someone else, and her position of just being looked down as a nepo baby instead of someone who works hard and has unmatched intellect makes you feel for her. I also like how much connection she has to other characters, Lifeweaver, Symmetra, and Lucio, who are also three very interesting characters. And I love seeing the difference between Domina and Symmetra. Symmetra is obviously one of these architects who has that natural eye, that artistic eye. Because if you look at their hard-light manipulations in game, they are very different. Everything about Symmetra's is perfect, whereas Vera's is a little bit off. She also uses her robotic arms to help manipulate light for her. Vera also differs from other villains we have in the game. You see, Domina isn't really a bad guy. She's not really a main antagonist. Whereas say Doomfist, Reaper, Mauga, Vendetta, they're all very intimidating in their ability to fight. Whereas Domina is a different kind of villain. You see, Domina, while in game she does play on the battlefield, she's more of a 2 steps ahead of you in chess kind of villain. At the same time, she isn't really villainous. She's more so insecure about her reputation and is willing to do what she can to make herself live up to her perfect image, where she can use Vendetta's war against the world as a way to build Vishkar back up, make it sort of a savior, rebuilding places that Vendetta destroys. Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Now today we are going to take a look at the brand new comic that just dropped for Overwatch called Picture of Success, and this comic is going to focus on Domina. Before we get into it though, guys, make sure you check out the Overwatch lore playlist as well as the Overwatch theories playlist. We've been doing a lot of theorizing here on the channel, where the Overwatch story is going to go, how certain characters are going to move forward in the future. So head on over to those videos after this and join the discussion. But without further ado, let's take a look at the heir to the Vishkar fortune, Domina. So the comic starts off with Domina in her office, and with someone outside her door knocking. The person outside her door, seemingly an assistant, is letting her know a ceremony is going to begin shortly, and as she is uploading a speech to her datapad. Domina already seems kind of annoyed and a bit agitated about tonight. She goes on to mention that she's maximized the budget to make this event a true spectacle. Every detail in place is a balance of impact and efficiency. So she seems very worried about making tonight perfect, and she seems very agitated that someone would test her patience now, moments before she is set to take stage. So she begins rehearsing her speech, and it's made very clear from the get-go that this ceremony is for the Vishkar Awards, and the award is going to someone who has reimagined archnetechnical applications. As she reads more of the speech, it becomes clear that they're not introducing her in a way she seems happy with, starting off with her family. She is very obviously bugged that they are mentioning her family before mentioning any of her own successes. And she also seems a little pissed off that she even needs to introduce herself feeling that everyone in the room will already know who she is. As the speech continues to talk more about her family, she gets bugged even more, since the speech mentions her connections to the Singanya family, and she thinks as soon as she says connections that she's lost the crowd.
On your family's connections to Vishka are... Ugh, connections? Once I say connections, I've lost them. They'll think only of the Singanya name on the plaque outside, and my grandfather's legacy. Vishka isn't a dynasty. Well, I suppose it is.
She thinks it will give her the image that she was handed the position due to Vishkar being her grandfather's legacy. She also goes on to mention that Vishkar isn't a dynasty, but in fact it is. She gets even more angry as she reads through the rest of the script, finding out that she wants to spend 3 minutes praising their architects. How she's meant to go on saying that Vishkar would be nothing without their architects' hard work. She goes on to mention that she's the one in charge here, that it's her fortune that funds their academies, that it's her contracts that secure their assignments, and that she's already dedicating an evening to their success, and she thinks they hardly need any more of her praise. She then goes on to say that the speech is useless and that she's basically gonna freeball it. As she goes on with her own speech in her own words, she says an executive like herself should project the same lightness that the company provides. She goes on to say that as an architect and an entrepreneur, she has found a wealth of success and that people have called her too generous for sharing that success with the company.
Of success. Some have called me too generous for sharing my victories with the company, but a rising tide elevates every ship, as they say.
But she says a rising tide elevates all ships, and that under her insight, under her leadership, no group has risen higher than Vishkar. She states to those in the room that talent will only get you so far, and the reason why Domina is so successful was because of her drive that got her through all her schooling. She goes on to say that she is proud to hold the Singanya family name, but she wouldn't attribute all her success to her family's upbringing, and that their support was always specific in their focus. She even goes on to say that while the public can be quite crucial, one's own kin can be far more cruel. She then starts to sound a bit more angry and a bit more tense, as she states that her family initially did not buy into her initial forays into hard light manipulation, that it was the resources and time she put into her craft that helped her perfect it better than any academy could. She also learned not to tolerate anyone who would question the merit of her work, or anyone who would insinuate that she did not earn her position. And she goes on to say there was a lot more than just applying your architectural work, that it also comes down to the art of negotiation, to presentation, to crafting an image that's untouchable, an image that's worthy. She goes on to say that that is the true test of talent before spiraling and getting annoyed again. She goes on to say that even if she was to give her own input, that no one would respect her, let alone believe her, and that she is just going to give them what they want, stand up on the stage, smile, read the speech, and hand out the award. She goes on to say that she is Vera Singanya, that she is heiress to the Vishkar Corporation, and that she will be the one to lead Vishkar to a brighter future. And that's where the comic ends. Now, this doesn't give us a lot of insight into the current Overwatch story, but it does give us a pretty big insight into Domina's character. My first impression while listening to this comic play out was, damn, Domina's pretty insecure, that she is very worried about the public seeing her as anything less than perfect, and about the public seeing her as just a lazy bum who was handed a corporation. She seems like she really needs the public's opinion to be very high of her, and we also get this from inline voice games. What? In-game voice lines. That she will not accept anything below her standard, and that is not her who will stoop to her team's level, her team must rise to hers. We also get to see that Domina is supposedly very unrecognized for all the hard work she has done, feeling that the architects don't deserve as much praise as she should be getting, and that she may be highly undervalued by the public, Vishkar, and her family. It also gives us more insight into her past, that maybe her family didn't like her that much at all, or perhaps they were just too harsh on her, pushing for a path she didn't agree with. And we know from her Overwatch official website story that when her professional life began, she insisted on working outside of the family business. She's made it very clear that anyone who thinks she rose to the top of Vishkar by either nepotism, bribery, or sheer persistence, she would not tolerate, because she knows she worked really hard and that it was her drive that brought her to the top. So it's cool to see this sort of insight into Domina's character, how she is as a person. Very interesting to see that she has sort of this fight between herself to be perfect and to make everyone believe that she is not just some nepo baby. Very interesting insight indeed.
Look at them, Papa. Look at them. I wish you were here to see their faces.
Overwatch 2 is gaining a brand new DPS hero on the 9th of December. With her official arrival being soon, I thought, why don't we sit back and take a look at the backstory of Vendetta. Grab a snack, grab a drink, check out the Overwatch lore playlist after this video, and let's dive right in to Vendetta. Marcia Bartolotti was born as the sole child of former businessman and talent member Antonio Bartolotti. She was initially a wild and reckless kid, but Antonio tempered her more reckless instincts as he raised her. This included teaching her how to hunt and to play chess. As a kid, Marcia wanted to be part of her father's business, but he wanted a different life for her. One day, she interrupted a meeting between him and Akande Ogundimu. Caught off guard, Antonio introduced her to him. She learned early on to never underestimate an enemy. A decade before the current events of Overwatch, her father was assassinated by Blackwatch in an operation in Venice. He was assassinated by none other than Gabriel Reyes, who turned out to be Reaper. Marcia bitterly noted that her father's death had reinforced what she had already knew, to never underestimate an enemy. After his death, Marcia was denied her inheritance and Talon seized her accounts, assets, and allies. Ogundimu gave away her position on Talon's inner council to someone else, and she was cast into the pits of Colosseo. This bitterness and despair over her loss, of what she was denied, of what she felt was owed to her, never went away. Now known as Vendetta, she carved out a legacy for herself in the only way she knew how, through bladed fury. She became a gladiator within the Colosseo, eventually being raised to the status of celebrity. Well, of sorts. She coined the nickname La Lupa, which translates to mean the wolf. When it came to gladiatorial matches, she became known as a villain. At first, she hated it, despised it. The cheers from the crowd was a constant reminder of all the useless and powerless men her father had surrounded himself with. Nevertheless, she climbed her way into being a legend, her influence growing with every victory she managed to gain. Despite this, however, whispers of her past continued to proliferate outside the arena. While in the Colosseo, she had her fair share of wins and losses, but she managed to turn this former recklessness she had as a child and focused it into rage. A rage she could control to her advantage. The turning point in her gladiatorial career was when she managed to defeat a massive Omnic warbot. This was the moment that sealed her popularity, as the crowd all around her chanted her name, Vendetta. She was indifferent to this, however. This adoration, these people cheering her name, was all a means to an end. She knew that one day she would take back what was stolen from her and her father, and she would use these people to do it. She climbed the ranks and earned a place among Colosseo's elites, and her imposing silhouette decorated the walls all over the Colosseo. Her dominance in the arena elevated her to legendary status and helped her gain power, influence, and the spot amongst Europe's elites. She gained assets, allies, and a network of her own. Some people in Europe's elite were willing to work with her as proximity to Colosseo's most famous gladiator was valuable for some people in high places. One day she would cross paths with a Talon Council member. He helped finance her next match in exchange for her to put in a good word with her other sponsors. After al-g-man was arrested by Overwatch in Singapore, Vendetta decided to attack Talon's base in Venice. This attack failed, however, but over the years, Talon's power would wane, and hers would only continue to grow. Years later, after al-g-man escapes from his confinement at HSI and reclaims the position of head of Talon, Vendetta declared that this was her moment, that no more time would be wasted on meaningless opponents, and that it was time to strike back at her true enemies. She set up a meeting with the Talon Council member she had met with years ago, but instead of making a deal, she killed him to send a message to the organization. This is all the backstory we have on Vendetta as of now. An interesting character with an interesting backstory. It has been declared that Vendetta is a villain within the Overwatch universe, so it's nice to be getting a brand new villain that actually has some relation to the Overwatch story. An issue I had with Hazard was that he felt very random. His faction didn't really have any solid place in the Overwatch universe up until that point, and he doesn't really seem all that threatening. But when Vendetta, I do like it. Daughter of a previous Talon member who was killed by Overwatch, and after his death, denied her everything she owed that her father worked so hard for. Vendetta has claimed control of Talon, and now with Doomfist defeated, she intends to take Talon to the top of the world. Not a Talon in the shadows, but basking in the sun. This is a very different Talon to what we've dealt with in the past Overwatch lore. Talon has always been sort of a shadow organization, sort of a puppet master in the grand scheme of things, making everything go their way while not being in the spotlight. She goes on to claim that Doomfist preferred to acquire allies instead of using them, and that now if you were to sit at the Talon table, you won't benefit from it without giving something in return. We then go on to reveal that Domina, one of the brand new heroes getting added to Overwatch, is working closely with Vendetta on making new armor for the Talon Mercs and for Vendetta's new gladiators, those of which will be equipped with new shielding that learns from their fighting styles, and that once the project has been fully rolled out, they will be unstoppable. So we can already see that Vendetta is really working on acquiring and using these new allies, already putting Domina to work so the Talon may benefit from Vishkar's resources. Moira, however, goes on to point out that 3 of Talon's most valuable assets have left the organization over disagreements in leadership, those agents being Reaper, Widowmaker, and Sombra. Moira has concerns about if they have enough personnel that are capable of taking down a Helix facility in Grand Mesa. A concern she is right to have, since Widowmaker and Reaper were some of Talon's best agents for committing operations. However, Vendetta puts her concern to rest, stating that Maximilian has found new allies for Talon, them being Omre and Freya. Now, it's a little shocking to see Freya, an ex-Overwatch member, who seemingly isn't a bad person, working for an organization such as Talon. But Freya is only here because she is a bounty hunter and is doing the operation because Maximilian will pay her fee. Moira gives her some grief and talks about if Freya is happy with finding her old friend Emre, and if he's still as she remembers him. Emre states that the operation will be no problem for Freya and himself, since they have both run operations from Grand Mesa before and know the layout pretty well. Emre also goes on to say he knows the guard's rotation and that it shouldn't be too hard to get by. It is then revealed to us that a distraction will be made with help from Ash and the Deadlock Rebel gang. There seems to be a little bit of distrust between Ash and Vendetta due to this being the first time the Deadlock Rebels have worked with Talon. Ash does assure her though that she will get her distraction. We then go to Tokyo, where the Hashimoto have gained assistance from Talon to secure Tokyo for themselves. Just after that, Mauga is being sent on a diplomatic mission to Junkertown to see if they can gain Junker Queen and the Junkers as an ally, and that if they prove to be more of a threat than an ally, Mauga will be there to set them right. This could be major for Talon if they were to acquire the Junkers as an ally, but oddly enough, I don't see it happening. The Junkers seem to be pretty alright with being themselves, especially not Junker Queen with her being the queen, and Vendetta has a big sort of I'm the boss thing going on, and I don't think Junker Queen would like that too much. So I'd be eager to see how this plotline pans out. But anyway, moving on, the only thing standing in Vendetta's way right now is Overwatch. Maximilian raises some concern about why would they waste resources going after Overwatch when it is rumored they will be disbanded in a couple of days since Null Sector has retreated. Vendetta doesn't like the sound of that though. She says she's tired of this lack of vision. Vendetta believes Doomfist was lazy and refused to act while Overwatch was disbanded for years. And while Overwatch was toothless, there was nothing standing in their way from claiming the world for themselves. She believes that Doomfist's ideology let Overwatch get back to power by pushing Null Sector to act, forcing Overwatch to intervene. She also believes Doomfist should have striked Overwatch while they were busy dealing with Null Sector and not trying to pick them off one by one. Now Overwatch have grown stronger and must be put down before they can recruit any new members. Maximilian pipes up to say when is Vendetta planning this attack, but Vendetta quickly shuts him down, saying she isn't planning it, that it already has happened. She reveals that Watchpoint Gibraltar has been hit with numerous Talon strikes. The look in the room is varied, with Omre and Freya looking sort of remorseful. Moira doesn't seem to care. Mauge couldn't be happier, and the rest of the room looks shocked. Vendetta says there is a certain satisfaction that comes from being a conqueror no one believed in, that she was cast into the shadows and forgotten, but now everyone will know her name. And that does it for the Little Vengeance Comes story time. This was a really insightful comic that gave us a lot into the lore going forward in Overwatch, into this new era of Talon. Vendetta isn't taking no prisoners when it comes to waging war on the rest of the world. She is going to take what she believes is rightfully hers, and no one is going to stand in her way. I personally cannot wait to see the aftermath of what happened to Watchpoint Gibraltar and how all Overwatch agents on base handle this attack. I'm also eager to see how the storyline progresses further, with Mauga going to Junkertown to see if they can recruit the Junker Queen. I'm also eager to see what happens with Sombra, Widowmaker and Reaper. Are they going to go and find a potentially alive Doomfist? Will Widowmaker's brainwash effect wear off and she'll regain her mind? Will they run into Anna and Soldier 76 and form a little team of themselves to take down this new Talon? Perhaps we could get a little temporary alliance between Reaper and Soldier 76 where they put their guns aside and work as a team. I'm so eager to see how this story progresses. Overwatch is back, ladies and gentlemen.
We stand on the brink of a breakthrough in human evolution. I have dedicated my life to unraveling its secrets. I take risks that others would consider to be unwise, for I do not share their caution. New patrons emerged who possessed an appetite for my discoveries. And with this knowledge, what new world could we build?
Equal parts brilliant and controversial, scientist Moira O'Dearn is on the cutting edge of genetic engineering, searching for a way to rewrite the fundamental building blocks of life. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at Moira and her story. Before we get into it though, I just want to say thank you so much for the support on the Overwatch lore videos. It really means a lot. I really enjoy doing them, and now that I have a new microphone, I'll be doing so much more. So subscribe to the channel to get notified when these lore videos go out, and to participate in the poll every week to decide who we do next. And if you haven't already checked out the Overwatch lore playlist, you should do that after this video. We got some great videos in there, like the little Ramattra series. But now, sit back, relax, grab a snack, keep warm, and let's take a look at Overwatch 2's genetic mastermind, Moira O'Dearn. To start things off, Moira is a geneticist from Dublin, Ireland. As a scientist, O'Dearn only cared about the evolutionary advancement of humanity. She has very flexible morals and prefers to focus on her research, and has no patience for those who urge caution or restraint. She is uncaring of the goals of those she allies with, provided that they continue to fund her research. Due to experimentation on herself, her right arm is heavily scarred. She is fascinated with artificial decay as a means of reversing entropy, but this experiment on herself has placed her remaining lifespan on a timer. Over a decade ago, she made waves when she published a controversial paper detailing a methodology for creating custom genetic programs that could alter DNA at a cellular level. It seemed like a promising step forward. A step forward to overcoming diseases and disorders and maximizing human potential. As revolutionary as it was, it caught some dissent among her peers. Many considered her work to be dangerous because of its perceived ethical shortfalls, and O'Dearn was even accused of having the same unchecked desire for scientific advancement that some believed had caused the Omnic Crisis. In addition, other geneticists were unable to reproduce the results of Moira's research, which further called her discoveries into question. Instead of kickstarting her career, her paper seriously damaged her reputation. Among those who condemned her research, Overwatch was one of them, and in her own words, Overwatch tried to silence her. However, she received a lifeline in an offer from an unlikely source: Overwatch's covert Black Ops division, Blackwatch. She was personally recruited by Blackwatch's commander, Gabriel Reyes, who wanted someone who could help advise him on matters pertaining to genetics. Her employment was kept a closely guarded secret. She continued her work in the shadows while developing new weapons and technologies for the organization. Freed from her shackles, her genetic research greatly accelerated. She had interactions with Blackwatch members Cole Cassidy and Genji Shimada, all of whom had their likes and dislikes pertaining to each other. Among her experiments was one done on Reyes himself. Her experiments on Reyes gave him superhuman abilities, causing his cells to regenerate and decay at a hyper-accelerated rate. Next, we move on to Retribution. Eight years before the present day, O'Dearn took part in a Blackwatch mission to Rialto to apprehend Antonio Bartolotti, an Italian businessman with links to Talon. The team consisted of herself, Reyes, Genji, and Cole. The Blackwatch team arrived in a Venice safe house and set up surveillance on the manor. They found Talon soldiers patrolling the grounds. When night fell, they infiltrated the manor. They made their way up through its interior, killing or incapacitating numerous Talon guards. Upon reaching Antonio's office, they found him there, not surprised to see them. Nor was he intimidated. A conversation would ensue, where Antonio would talk that Overwatch abducting a respected businessman would be bad for public relations, and even if they did take him, his friends would have him released within a week. This is where Commander Reyes would give it some thought and decide Antonio wasn't worth the trouble. Instead of leaving, Reyes decided to kill Antonio. The force of the blast sending him straight through his office window. Immediately after this, the alarm was sounded, alerting Talon to the presence of the Blackwatch team, leaving them to act out Plan B. During the battle that would ensue, O'Dearn would tell Reyes that he had done the right thing and that he shouldn't apologize. Despite the overwhelming force of Talon, the team successfully exfiltrated the site. However, this incident would make Blackwatch known to the world, resulting in both political and public fallout. In the inquiries that followed, O'Dearn's research was uncovered. Many high-ranking Overwatch officials disavowed all knowledge of her affiliation with them. All members of the Blackwatch team were put under suspension. After the Venice incident, O'Dearn was forced to turn to unconventional sources of funding, so she turned to Talon. She was now the organization's geneticist, and she would alter Amelia LaCroix, slowing her heart rate down to improve her aim and suppress her human emotion. This caused her skin to turn cold and blue. Little side note, if I see anyone commenting that Widowmaker's skin is purple, you're wrong. A couple of years after the Venice incident, Overwatch HQ was destroyed in a fight between Reyes and Jack Morrison. Reyes barely survived the ordeal and was saved by O'Dearn, who injected him with an amplified version of the substance she injected him with years ago. She claimed he had been close to death and had no alternative. Whether this was true or not, Reyes was alive, albeit in a state of agony. Talon continued to aid O'Dearyn in her experiments in exchange for utilizing the results for their own purposes. But while O'Dearyn worked with Talon in secret, she maintained appearances in the scientific community. She was invited to join the scientific collective that had been founded in the city of Oasis, becoming their Minister of Genetics. However, some whispered of O'Dearyn's connections to Talon. By the time of Doomfist's return to Talon, O'Dearyn apparently had a seat on Talon's inner council. O'Dearyn's goals of pushing humanity's evolution forward meshed well with Talon's, and she found a patron for her research in the hands of Doomfist. Other than the strange substance she was keeping in Oasis that the Freaks and Hazard stole, this is kinda it for Moira. A character who is more so on the underdeveloped side when it comes to lore. We do know from an interaction with Doomfist that she is working on a new experiment and that it is making progress.
I have yet to see a report on your latest experiment.
It's making progress.
Our timeline is non-negotiable.
Keep interrupting me, surely that'll expedite things.
She also has many a voice line with Sigma on how Moira is working closely with Sigma and testing him. Although be it Sigma's madness tests Moira's patience quite a bit.
Have you enjoyed your time away with the fairies, Dr. de Cowper?
They do make lovely conversation.
We also know with voice lines with Sombra that Moira has not experimented on Omnics. Well, not as of yet. But as I've said, this is all we really have for lore on Moira, which is kind of a shame. I would love to see more sort of abominations, as people call, that Moira is making. I discussed this briefly, well, I say briefly, it was a good chunk of the video, in my horrors of Overwatch 2. Moira being this genetic mastermind could lead to her building all sorts of bio-abominations. Her obsession with biology could lead her to making bioweapons, such as Nemesis from Resident Evil. I would love to see a new character being added to the game that is just an experiment of Moira's. Maybe some mad Frankenstein stuff. Maybe she had created life. Artificial life. I'm just state artificial life. It starts off with Moira recording a log, talking about Project Chimera Experiment 74B. What this is Moira working on a new, improved version of the Super Soldier Serum. The same serum that was given to Soldier 76 and Reaper. This is what the attack on Grand Mesa was conducted for. Moira then goes on to talk about how Dr. Houghton's work was incredible, that it was elegant, but also states that it could have been made much better if Dr. Horton wasn't hampered by excessive ethical considerations. And she states that the death of progress comes from reluctance to push beyond the limits. But now Dr. Horton's creation now lies in the hands of Moira. Now Moira is mixing the serum with her own concoction. And the reason she is doing this is because Vendetta wants a safe, mass-producible serum for herself and her gladiators. Something that gives them enhanced strength, speed, cognitive processing with no need for metabolic respite. It also has to come with zero risk. Moira states how Vendetta shares her father's ambition but lacks the patience. And then Moira goes on to say that she expects some form of retribution since Moira had a part to play in her father's downfall. But Vendetta is now funding all of Moira's research without even giving it a second thought. She then goes on to talk about how Doomfist has fallen and Vendetta has risen, but states this is a minor footnote in her logs. She says that Akande's managerial virtue was basically just staying out of Moira's way, and it talks about whether or not Vendetta is going to offer her that same independence is an open variable. Nonetheless, her work remains a constant. But she does say that under Doomfist she had stability, something that she's seen as a flaw, that she wasn't being pushed to make new things, conduct more research, and now under Vendetta, things are getting a little more interesting. Moira then moves on to talking about Reaper and the experiments she's conducted on him in the past. She talks about the cellular regeneration that she induced upon Reyes and how it was a monumental leap, doing this to force the body to continuously repair itself, to cheat death through pure biological will. A brutal but yet beautiful concept. But along with this regeneration came an accompanying degeneration, which was volatile. Moira states that she learned more about Reaper's body tearing itself apart than she ever did from the temporary stasis Reaper's body fought to maintain. And with Reyes himself already a super soldier, she had to work backward from this result. But now with the original formulation in hand, Moira's seeing this as an opportunity to build something better from the ground up. She goes on to claim that progress demands a price, and that she had no objections to accepting the stolen serum from Vendetta. But she recalls how her own personal work has suffered 2 setbacks already. First in Runa Sapi, where her data on the Inti warriors were sabotaged, and then secondly in Oasis, when Hazard and his group of freaks broke in to steal her vanadium isotope. But she reflects on this a little bit and states that the loss of a tool is not the loss of knowledge. Having seen what it did to Hazard allowed her to view the serum in a different way. That allowed her to bind the serum's properties to a subject's telomeres directly. And with that, the synthesis is complete. No violent exothermic reaction, no rapid crystallization, just a perfect, pliable solution. A formulation that will make Vendetta and her gladiators practically unstoppable. Or so, that's what she will tell them. In truth, whatever power this serum brings will be Vendetta's to wield alone, which is a predictable move for one so fixated on a crown. Moira goes on to state that scientific research and advancement stops for no one. Not for failed subjects, not for stolen isotopes, and not for the rise and fall of the world's warlords. That scientific advancement is a river, and that Moira is its only conscious current. The story time ends with Moira saying,
Samples proceeding to Phase 1 trials.
now what does this mean for the grand scheme of things of the Overwatch lore? Well, basically, Moira is now being fully funded by Vendetta. Moira is also aware of how volatile Vendetta is and how far she's willing to go to win her war. So far that she has Moira researching soldier serum and improving on it, so that she can make herself and her gladiators much more unstoppable. Now this could be devastating if this is to play off in the lore, because that would make Vendetta a force to be reckoned with, so much more than she already is. And if this is brought out to her gladiators and Vendetta's army, that makes Talon a much more devastating force, which is kind of scary to think of, because if you have a whole army of super soldiers, you can see what Soldier and Reaper were able to do during the Omnic Crisis. This serum isn't just that, it's that, but going Kaioken, which would be devastating for Overwatch. So what are ways Overwatch could combat this themselves? Well, perhaps they could look out for Reaper, maybe ask him to come back. That might not work. Maybe they find Soldier, ask him to come back. That also might not work. What if they were to go to my boy here? What if they were to reach out to Null Sector and be like, look guys, we can strike a deal here. We can promise a nation for your Omnics. We can promise it. You gotta help us out against this bitch. She's kind of nuts. She's going off. That seems unlikely. But it would be really cool to see them reach out to Null Sector and be like, right, we need to form some sort of truce here and become allies. Because there is good in Ramattra. There is good in this guy. He is not a bad person. He's just fighting for his Omnics. He's not a bad guy. He's not a bad guy. So they could reach out to Null Sector and be like, yo, we need to join forces. We could really use your help. Would that be cool? Of course it would. Will it happen? Overwatch seems like just, we're the good guys. We don't team up with any bad guys. You gotta be just Overwatch or we're not dealing. But it would be pretty cool to see Null Sector join with Overwatch, form an agreement, form a alliance to stop Talon destroying everything and taking over the world, basically. Because right now, Vendetta be on some Homelander shit, going absolutely insane. But we've also seen that Moira has been looking into other parts of Overwatch lore that don't get brought up very much and haven't been brought up much at all. Especially with Illari and the Inti Warriors, because I've felt for the longest time personally that Illari is very placed into Overwatch and it's just very separate from everything else that's going on. So it's nice to hear the Inti Warriors and Illari indirectly being mentioned. It's also nice to see Hazard getting mentioned, because ever since Hazard came out, we haven't seen much about the Freaks or Hazard, so it's nice to see that getting addressed. Really good to see that it's finally getting addressed. What Hazard did in Oasis stealing this isotope from Moira. But then Moira is sitting back, taking a look at it and being like, alright, look what it did to him. I can refine that and make it better. Which is so crazy. So crazy. I cannot wait for Overwatch Infinity War. I can't wait for it. I can't wait for it. Oh, we're gonna have the crossover this century with all these factions teaming up with each other and fighting World War. I can't wait for it. I can't wait. I'm so glad more stuff is getting mentioned. I'm so glad all this lore is coming out. And oh my god, I'm so excited about it. I love the lore. Mizuki Kawano was born in Fukuoka under a shadow of misfortune. As a baby, he was surrounded by unexplained tragedies, his grandparents lost to unnatural causes, and a mother who drowned in a freak accident. His father was disturbed by a streak of bad luck, and was convinced that their bloodline was cursed. Each night, Mizuki was told tales of malevolent spirits that haunted their family as he was tucked into bed. His father's mental state would go on to worsen, and he would flee to Tokyo with Mizuki in a desperate attempt to escape the curse. This misfortune would just continue, however, as Mizuki's father would plunge the two of them into debt, taking out loans with the Hashimoto clan. This was to pay for Lucky Charms, exorcists, and anything else said to ward off misfortune. But as fate would have it, Mizuki's father was found dead one day, leaving Mizuki to fend for himself. Now at 9 years old, Mizuki would inherit his father's debt to the Hashimoto, and believed that this curse that afflicted his entire family would claim him next. You know, it's really shitty to Hashimoto being like, yo kid, your dad owed us money, now you owe us money. But nevertheless, one of the clan's elders took a keen interest in the boy, seeing a touch of potential, where other members of the clan just saw a burden. And with a surprising show of mercy, the Hashimoto offered to forgive what Mizuki owed in exchange for his loyalty. Now, with the boy nowhere left to turn, he accepted his fate, believing that resisting it as his father had done might trigger this curse once again. At first, he was too young for their criminal dealings, so he was often just left behind in the stronghold. And in his own boredom, he often wound up in the company of Toshiro Yamagami, who was a weaponsmith captured by the Hashimoto, who was famous for crafting anima weaponry. As Mizuki would grow older, clan would deem him worthy enough to take on jobs. During this harsh walk of life, it was Toshiro's kindness that balanced his soul. Mizuki would then be tasked with infiltrating the rebellious yokai of Kanezaka. On this topic, he would seek Toshiro's advice one last time. He was reluctant to embark on a mission where he might have to hurt innocent people. Yet, it was his fear of both the elders and his curse that made it difficult for him to even think of abandoning his responsibilities. Toshiro would recognize Mizuki's inner struggle and offer him one final gift: his very own anima kusarigama, a symbol of his faith in Mizuki's power to take control of his own fate. Toshiro would urge him to find his own path on the journey ahead, encouraging Mizuki to seek his own place in the world. Now Mizuki resides in Kanezaka and has successfully joined the yokai, although this leads him to finding himself caught between fulfilling his clan's duties and the desire to protect his newfound friends. Only time will tell if he can maintain his cover and decide where his true loyalties lie. And that's for the main sort of backstory we have on Mizuki. Another highly interesting character like Emre, whose lore leaves a lot to be developed. Him being the first playable character of the Hashimoto clan is also really interesting. The Hashimoto have been sort of prevalent in the Overwatch story for quite a while now, with them being seen in Kiriko's cinematic and Genji and Hanzo's. Another interesting thing is that Toshiro, the blacksmith who gives Mizuki advice, is Kiriko's father. And it is due to Toshiro that Mizuki is now having a change of heart. I like Mizuki because he's very just misunderstood and obviously a very lonely person due to all his family dying in mysterious and unfortunate ways. And he seems to be kind at heart. And it is quite sad that Mizuki was found by the Hashimoto at such a young age and denied him of having a regular childhood. And his gameplay is really cool. I really like that his healing is done like Lucio's, but it can be amped up by doing damage to enemies. I really like that. His ultimate is such a pain to deal with though. As cool it is to have it on your team, playing against it on the enemy team, it does make it really difficult to actually play any characters like Emre or Soldier. Any sort of character that does have to shoot a projectile, it could really help turn a fight. And it's also really interesting to see that he's the first playable character from Japan that is incapable of climbing walls, which I'm kind of glad about. They're not going just a route that all characters from Japan are ninjas and are capable of climbing walls and stuff, so it is pretty cool to see. I am interested in seeing how much more lore comes out for Mizuki because he is really, really cool. His design is really unique and the weapon he has is really sick. I know a lot of people are interested in Mizuki and I see a lot of people playing him in game, so it is pretty cool to see that a new character, a new support is so well liked within the Overwatch community, and he's pretty cool, especially with the whole clashing of where his loyalties lie. Are they with the yokai? Are they with the Hashimoto, who are now affiliated with Talon? I'm eager to see if he'll maintain his connection with the Hashimoto or he will fully join the yokai. It'd also be nice to see a bit of conflict there as well. Maybe that gets revealed at some stage. Be a cool little side story to follow. Let me know how you feel about Mizuki. Do you like him? Do you dislike him? Do you think he's boring? Do you think he's interesting? The comic starts off with some backstory about Mizuki, how he was brought in by the Hashimoto after his father died, and he is brought directly to Shion. A Hashimoto member questions Shion as why she would want to take in a kid, and she states that she will train him, not for the Hashimoto, but for herself. After this little bit of backstory, we come to present day, where Mizuki talks that ever since he joined with the yokai, this has been the first time he hasn't heard Shion's voice in his head. He tells Kiriko that Overwatch have arrived and they're here to help save Genji. So Overwatch and the yokai begin going over their plan. Kiriko tells them that Genji is being held in a Hashimoto fortress. Baptiste questions the quality of Kiriko and the yokai's intel, but she assures them that despite them looking like kids, they've been in the fight for years, and that it is good intel. She also tells them that Talon and the Hashimoto are working together, and that they are transporting weapons to aid Talon. But Sojourn mentions how they aren't just transporting any type of weapon, they are transporting anima weapons. The same type of weapon as Genji's blade. So they plan to split up into two teams. One team will go to the train station where the weapons handoff is being done, and the other will head to the Hashimoto fortress to rescue Genji. Mizuki also brings up that they should get in, rescue Genji, and destroy the forge using explosives. Sojourn doesn't really like the sound of explosives, but Mizuki states that if they have no more forge, the Hashimoto can no longer make any more anima weapons. So the plan is set, and so they head out to commence it. But Kiriko has something she wants to bring up to Mizuki before they do it. She mentions that this may be the only opportunity they'll get to rescue her father Toshiro, who is being held here, imprisoned by the Hashimoto. Mizuki assures her that they'll make this one shot count, and with that, they begin their assault on the fortress, as Mizuki lets them in via a keycard that he supposedly stole. When running through the halls, Hanzo tells them where the cells are, as he had also been captured here. But Kiriko gets a call on her comms device. It's Sojourn letting them know that they don't have much time left, as the Hashimoto are on their way back. The yokai begin to panic, one of them exclaiming that they have to turn back, and the other saying they can't turn back now. Kiriko reassures them and calms them down, saying that they can still do this, they just have to not panic. Mizuki then states that they need more time, and that he'll cause them a distraction so they can get Genji, Kiriko's father, and destroy the forge. Kiriko tries to stop him, saying we'll get another opportunity, but Mizuki proceeds on anyways, where he leaves and goes straight to the office of Shion. On his way there, we get another little flashback of how Shion treated him while growing up, telling him that life is about pain. You either give into it or you learn to wield it. It goes over how Shion trained him to be a weapon. We also see that Shion uses Mizuki as a way to hurt Toshiro, where we see Toshiro is bandaging his arm up, and Mizuki states it was a message that if you don't work faster, she'll take my arm for real. Shion welcomes him back, but states she's heard rumors of him making friends and potentially betraying the Hashimoto. Mizuki then reveals that he has picked his side and that he stands with the yokai. Shion states so it is true, you have betrayed the Hashimoto, and then a battle breaks out between the two. They trade words as they fight, Mizuki saying how Shion never cared about him, how she just wanted to use him as a weapon to aim, that the yokai showed him kindness for no reason at all. And even during this fight, Mizuki manages to crack Shion's face. Shion mentions during the battle that Mizuki wouldn't be what he is today if it wasn't for her, how she made him, how she owns him, took him in, that she took care of him while his mother and father would rather die than do it themselves. That even after doing this, what is he going to have left? The yokai that showed him kindness are soon going to realize that he betrayed them just as he betrayed her. Mizuki then gets told that the yokai have made it to the forge, and with that he says one final line, that he is who Shion made him. With that, he returns to the forge using his paper doll return, where they rescue Genji and presumably Toshiro and destroy the forge. This lore drop is incredibly insightful. That reveals that when Mizuki was a child, it is revealed that Shion gave him a warning she would take his arm for real. And then going to present Mizuki, we can see that Shion is most likely the person who took Mizuki's arm. And this is a lore reveal we've been waiting for a bit, ever since Mizuki was, revealed to us and he was in game. What happened to his arm? And now we know it is most likely Shion that took his arm after he messed up in some way. But the lore implications of this are pretty good. Overwatch is now in Japan, fighting Talon and the Hashimoto, where they are rescuing Genji, trying to cut the Hashimoto off from supplying weapons to Talon, and dealing with Shion. Also, with Overwatch and the yokai presumably rescuing Kiriko's father, he will finally be reunited with Kiriko and Ama. And now we also know for certain which side Mizuki is fighting on. That now he is no longer a double agent, that he will now be fighting alongside the yokai and Overwatch. I also want to say Shion is an absolute badass in this comic. The way they've drawn her fighting in this is so incredibly sick. It is actually unreal. She's such a badass, and I genuinely cannot wait for her to be launched in game. I also want to say that I am a little bit confused. So if Overwatch have just gotten here and the attack on the train station that Overwatch are commencing to stop the weapons being handed off to Talon is happening at the exact same time as this, I'm a little confused about how Mizuki manages to get to Shion's office and she is there. I know the train left and Sojourn and Shion separated, but she also then has to go hand it off to Mauga, and I don't really think Sojourn would wait a while before letting them know what happened. So I'm a little confused on the timeline here, but I also do have a theory. What if this means Shion has multiple bodies that she can, transfer her consciousness through? Sort of like Revenant from Apex Legends.
The team needs you. Be their shield. Reinhardt, live with honor. Die with glory, old friend.
Now the comment I want to read out is this one right here. I think the most compelling part of Reinhardt's story is that Baldrich was meant to join Overwatch. Reinhardt, for his entire life, would forever live in the shadow of a fallen hero. Reinhardt has to answer the call, because he knows deep down that if Baldrich had lived instead of him, he would answer the call. He would be a shield for the innocent. He would be a hero. It doesn't matter if it is true or not that Baldrich would have been a greater hero for the world. What matters is that Ryan knows he is a stand-in. He knows that the world doesn't just need a hero, it deserved one. And he knows through personal experience that someone who might have been a boon to the world was taken away. In truth, for every hero that lives, there is at least a metaphorical Baldrich. For every person, there is a better version of themselves who could have been. You might not be the best version of yourself that you could have been, but that doesn't mean you can't still be a hero. We all have regrets. But what matters is that we live with honor. Glory can wait until the end, so don't focus on accolades. Focus on doing the right thing for all the people who would have done the right thing in your place. For all the versions of you who could have been, but never will be. For all would-be heroes, those who remain must strive to be better. The world is calling, and you must answer. This comment really stood out to me because it really hit me in a way that there is a lot more about Reinhardt that we can probably dive into that I didn't mention in the lore video. So today's topic of discussion is how Eichenwald changed Reinhardt forever. Now we know Reinhardt had a very tragic past, with his family being killed in the Omnic Crisis and him being the only Crusader to walk out of Eichenwald alive. And just for the sake of this video, I'm going to be mainly talking on cinematic universe Reinhardt as opposed to in-game Reinhardt, as in-game Reinhardt is usually shown to be cheery and upbeat, but there have been a lot of times in cinematics and cutscenes where we have seen Reinhardt being less cheerful and a little more emotional. I want to go back to the very start of the Reinhardt cinematic, where him and Brigitte are talking in the tavern, and Brigitte is trying to tell Reinhardt that despite everything he gave to Overwatch, they still pushed him out. So why would he go back?
Pushed you out. Why would you go back to them? What is that?
So, that's it. You're leaving us.
And I feel like this scene is perfectly done because as the camera zooms in on Reinhardt, it is very obvious that he is blanking everything Brigitte is saying, thinking only of the oath he made to his master. And my favorite thing about the comment I read was something that I didn't think of when I made the video originally, is that Baldrich was meant to join Overwatch. It was never Reinhardt's place. You know, it was something I glossed over shortly. It's like, oh, Baldrich died, so instead of Baldrich, Reinhardt took up the mantle. But I never really talked about or even thought about the impact that would have on Reinhardt. Reinhardt goes through the Battle of Eichenwald seeking nothing but glory, but once he stands up to an OR 14 unit and it pushes him, you know, on his ass, takes his eye, Baldrich is forced to intervene. And this was the crucial moment that Reinhardt's ego caused him to lose a dear friend.
Reinhardt!
Marvel Saints!
We're being overrun! Fall back to the rally point. I'll get Reinhardt. I had this. Obviously.
From the moment Baldrich was stabbed, he knew he wasn't going to make it. And as they reach the castle, Reinhardt pleads with Baldrich to just join him and fight their way throughout the castle. But as Baldrich remains steadfast that he is going to stand here and hold the line, it dawns on Reinhardt pretty quickly that Baldrich isn't going to make it. And I could just imagine the guilt immediately flowing through Reinhardt, knowing it was his decision, his stupid move, that has now gotten his mentor killed. And as that moment draws by before the Omnics shatter the door down, the words of Baldrich echo through Reinhardt's head.
Without you, Lieutenant, you took an oath to be a Crusader. Now, keep it. I won't leave you! The team needs you. Be their shield.
he gives up his hammer, returning to battle with only one thing to his name, and that is his shield. As the area is cleared, Reinhardt looks back at Eichenwald's castle, knowing one thing: that his mentor, Baldrich, has died. Now with the Battle of Eichenwald over and Baldrich dead, Reinhardt has one place to go: to take the spot of his mentor in joining Overwatch's strike team to put an end to the Omnic Crisis. This must have taken a massive toll on Reinhardt. His decision got his mentor killed, and now he has to live up to his mentor and replace him on the Overwatch strike team. This idea that Reinhardt will never hang it up because he is constantly living in the shadow of his fallen mentor really makes sense when thought about. It's not just Reinhardt having a determination to keep fighting, he feels like he needs to. Reinhardt doesn't hang it up because he doesn't want to. He feels like he can't. He's living in the shadow of someone who was better than him, had a better heart than him, and someone who died because of his mistake. He feels like he needs to live up to what Baldrich seen in him, and he'll never know if he lived up to Baldrich's standard due to an action that caused Baldrich his life. And I feel like this still haunts Reinhardt to this day, and that this is the actual reason as to why Reinhardt won't hang it up. And it's clear that his experience during the Omnic Crisis, dealing with these killing machines that took the lives of all his comrades and his mentor, is still very prominent within Reinhardt today. We see that the first reaction that Reinhardt has to seeing Bastion in Torbjorn's lab is to immediately charge it and put an end to the robot.
It's Null Sector! They found us! Get behind me!
Wait! He isn't one of them! It's okay. I've been taking care of him. He may be the last of his kind. Look, Bastion won't hurt you.
What? Bastion? It's not a pet! It's a killing machine!
No, not anymore.
Gah! How many friends did we lose to these things in the old war? And now you'd put your whole family at risk?
Reinhardt, that war was a lifetime ago. I've changed. He's changed. The only one who hasn't is you.
Despite Bastion's eye being blue and him being in Torbjorn's workshop, the logic of the situation completely goes out the window as Reinhardt is sent into a panic, thinking there is a killing machine capable of killing them all within Torbjorn's building. It's moments like this that really show the extent of Reinhardt's PTSD, and it's something I wish was shown more within the story. I wish we'd see more that Reinhardt genuinely does struggle with what happened at Eichenwald. I wish there was more voice lines that Reinhardt would talk about when on Eichenwald, as he only has a few. There's only really one voice line in game that talks about or even sort of references how bad it was at Eichenwald, and it's the one where he talks to Bastion, just telling Bastion that he's killed a lot of his kind here. There is another venture where he says my life was forever changed in this place and that it pains him to see it forgotten. But other than that, there isn't a lot of voice lines of Reinhardt talking about Eichenwald, and maybe that's just Overwatch devs not thinking of it, thinking it wouldn't be that, important for Reinhardt to have a ton of voice lines on Eichenwald. Or we can look at it in a way that Reinhardt doesn't really want to talk about what happened at Eichenwald due to it being his mistake that got Baldrich killed. Which honestly, I think is the truth. The reason why Reinhardt doesn't have a lot of voice lines relating to Eichenwald is because he doesn't want to speak publicly about the horrors he had experienced. But we do know, due to all the horrors he had witnessed, his personality was changed forever. He was changed forever. And when he returns to Eichenwald all those years later and places the Overwatch medal on the arm of the throne where Baldrich lay in peace, it's seen as a token of appreciation, because Baldrich was the one who made him the man he is. The man who will be there, be the shield for when his team needs. Baldrich's sacrifice changed Reinhardt, and it would also weigh on him for decades after he died. So I'd love to see more of this side of Reinhardt, seeing Reinhardt talk more about Eichenwald, hearing him describe how this affected him. I'd be highly interested in seeing Reinhardt's point of view and hearing his feelings all these years later on how Eichenwald changed him, since he is very upbeat and sort of jolly in game. When you really get down to it, playing on Eichenwald is kind of horrifying. It's the only map in the game that really shows the effects that the Omnic Crisis had on the world, which is probably one of the reasons it's my favorite map. Not only is it just an incredibly fun map to play on, it's one of the most gripping storytelling maps in the game. Everywhere is sort of normal, you know, just normal city or location, but Eichenwald has a story behind it, and that's what I really love about it. And especially after watching Honor and Glory, you can see the amount of chaos and destruction and war that was fought here, and knowing how it ends with Reinhardt being the only Crusader to escape the battle alive is horrifying. So this is one of the reasons I love Reinhardt so much, is that his character is beautifully written. One of the best in the entire game. So I'd be looking forward to see if we get any more lore in Reinhardt, because honestly he is one of the most interesting characters in the game, along with the likes of Sigma and Ramattra. But I'm going to leave this video here. I really enjoyed looking back at Reinhardt and seeing how all this stuff in his past really affects him and has changed him completely. The Omnic Crisis was the most devastating event in the Overwatch universe. Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. My name is al-g-man, and today I want to talk to you about the most important thing in Overwatch, that being the Omnic Crisis. We're going to start from the very beginning, going over the background of the war until its very end at the hands of Overwatch. So buckle up, because this is going to be a long video. So without further ado, let's dive in to this historical moment, the Omnic Crisis. It all begins with a corporation called Omnica. The Omnica Corporation built Omniums so that robot populations could be created to bolster manufacturing and create economic equality worldwide. These robots, or Omnics, were spread all around the world.
Everyday needs that puts power at your fingertips.
Line of robots that put power by your side.
And geared up to put power in their hands. Omnica Corp, always looking to what's next.
The next step for Omnica was to create the God programs. These would be the next generation of artificial intelligence, and they were interwoven into human infrastructure, woven so far into it that food distribution systems were so efficient that famine and poverty was eradicated. There are a few God programs worth mentioning, such as Chernobyl, which was a God program responsible for global security, Macaria, which was a God program responsible for communication equity, Xibalba, which I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, was a God program with the primary focus of energy equity, and finally we have Anubis, which was designed for conservation purposes. It wouldn't be long after that a team of Omnica scientists, led by Dr. Mina Liao, created the most advanced AI in history, Aurora. Aurora was fully sentient. We're not going to dive too much into Aurora here, since we have a video on Aurora on the channel. If you want to learn more about Aurora, you can go check out that video after this one. But Aurora is born, and while Aurora was on her path to legal personhood, this would have a knock-on effect to Omnica Corporation. You see, Due to Aurora being different than the rest of the Omnics, she was sentient, but her model could not be mass-produced, and her creation led to Omnica being subjected to a level of scrutiny it wasn't able to withstand, and eventually Omnica would shut down after. There'd be a few other things to be involved with this, along with evidence of fraud, so the production lines fell silent and Omniums were left unmonitored and abandoned. Now, since all these Omniums were just sort of abandoned and not destroyed, would lead to the first seeds of the Omnic War being sown. You see, one of the god programs that helped bring about this world, this utopia, that made life easier for humanity, would in fact be the one to start the war. Anubis. Previously mentioned to be the god program designed for conservation. On its own, it would deduce, for the betterment of the world and conservation, humanity must be eradicated. Now, there is evidence that Anubis planned its assault for months before the war actually began. An OR-7000 unit that would later be known as Ramattra came online on March 29th of the war's beginning. The actual war itself would begin in the third quarter of the year, with Anubis launching its assault in 2 waves. The first city to be affected by the god program was Lagos, where Omnics started attacking their owners. Social media reports would speak of invasion underway, while in Central Africa there were unconfirmed reports of firefights between humans and automated machines. The second wave would occur as the phenomena repeated itself in multiple cities all across the world. To note some, it would happen in London, Mexico City, Toronto, and Hong Kong. Now remember, Omnics are all over the world, so when this happened, humanity was completely caught off guard. All across the world there would be reports of Omnics attacking, and the casualty estimates placed the number of dead in the millions. The war had officially begun between Omnics and humanity, and this uprising was global. Cities all around the world were now under attack, and the conflict also had an effect on sparking civil unrest. In response, nations of the world would send their armed forces to battle the Omnics, and utilize their own technologies to combat the threat. Now, this was a war many countries thought they were prepared to fight, and for the most part, each country would fight independently. And this confidence wasn't without reason, as for the first 2 weeks of the war, Canada appeared to be winning. Humanity had greater firepower and air superiority, and not to mention that the Omnic servants integrated into their lives had not been designed for combat. Toronto was retaken from the Omnics, and a common refrain from the CAF was that they'd be home by Christmas. How foolish they would be. This was only the start. Who knows if this was tactical? If Anubis wanted to make these less combative Omnics start a war so humanity could get their hopes up that it would be fine in a matter of weeks. But this would change everything. Anubis would reactivate the previously abandoned Omniums, and within the first 24 hours of the war, some Omnic combat units were seen in action. These Omniums were capable of putting out legions of militarized robots, primarily consisting of E-54 Bastions, ATW Huntsmans, and the OR-14. Omnics would also hijack pre-existing technology such as the Titan Walker, and convert it into a weapon of war. The situation was growing ever more dire. No matter how many bots Anubis was losing, they were swiftly replaced, and the total number of Omnics numbered in the millions. Not one single nation on the planet, no matter how powerful its military was, could permanently shut down a single Omnium. One of the things that made it extremely difficult was that the robots were adapting. They were learning every single thing they knew about humanity's defenses, their tactics, everything. And these robots that were once celebrated by humanity had become a tactical nightmare. And the worst thing of all, there were no demands from the Omnic side. There was no reason for this aggression. Humanity could not strike a deal to end the war. They simply attacked, and not one person could understand why. Not a single country was able to secure its own territory, and the Omnics were able to take over the world. Some countries were able to hold out against invasion by creating unique task forces, such as the Soldier Enhancement Program in the United States or the Crusaders of Germany. But even these had their flaws. Most of the enhanced soldiers died in the augmentation process, and while the Crusaders had helped Germany tremendously through the war and secure victory at the Battle of Eichenwald, most of the Crusaders didn't walk out of that battle alive. Whether it was on the front lines or not, few heroes were found in the early days of the war. But human counterattacks could only generate a few weeks worth of momentum before the Omnics were able to counter them in turn. Particularly near the Omniums, Omnic counterattacks were vicious and gruesome, as they could resupply faster and introduce more variables to the battlefield. Omnics also had the advantage in night fighting, as infrared vision could only do so much to level the playing field. The war would continue on, and humanity would struggle to survive. The situation was dire, but in the shadow of this war, there was a small glimmer of hope.
Conflict. As the world teetered on the brink of anarchy, a new hope arose. An elite international task force charged with ending the war and restoring liberty to all nations. Overwatch. Soldiers, scientists, adventurers, oddities. Guardians who secured global peace for a generation. Under its steadfast protection, the world recovered. And today, though its watch has ended, its soaring ideals of freedom and equality will never be forgotten.
The United Nations would covertly bring together a few unique minds to form a small and nimble team, aimed at striking significant blows against Omnic strongholds. This international task force would be named Overwatch. Soon after the strike team's formation, Overwatch began gaining victories quickly, and the strike team took on near mythic properties. Eventually, rumors of Overwatch would spread through the world's militaries as a sign of hope for humanity winning the war. We now move on to the North American campaign, which would be a key turning point in the war. The Canadian Armed Forces, in conjunction with newly formed Overwatch strike members, would launch a counter-attack against Omnic forces to clear all southern cities in Canada down to Toronto, after which they would use infantry to establish a permanent perimeter against the Detroit Omnium's forces. This Omnium in Detroit had been pumping out a steady stream of Omnics and sending them north over the border into Canada. As a first attempt, Ottawa was subjected to bombing by the RCAF before infantry were sent in. However, the Overwatch Canadian forces were forced to retreat as the Omnic counterattack became too much to withstand. As winter would set in, the CAF supplies would begin to run thin. Regardless of this, however, a second attempt would be made, and Overwatch and the CAF forces were deployed in Toronto. This time, however, their plan would succeed. The siege would be deployed, which was a joint turret drone system. However, this battle would take a massive toll on the human forces, with a third of them being gone in casualties. By this point, it was still unknown to humanity that Anubis had any role in the crisis. It was also still a mystery how the Omniums were reactivated and why they were pumping out so many warbots. However, slowly but surely, those who were able to look through the data of the Omnics would be able to find Anubis's fingerprints everywhere. Dr. Mina Liao would point out Omnic tactics were adjusting on a global scale, which was surprising, as not only would each Omnium's force face different challenges, but as millions of Omnics were active, they would need some sort of hierarchy to sort through the communication. A CAF soldier by the name of Vivian Chase would suggest that maybe some kind of outside force was taking all the transmitted data and issuing orders to Omnic forces. This would lead to the Omniums being examined, with people shifting through all the network traffic, and Liao concluded that Chase's theory might have some weight. Chase then suggested that if the Omniums were receiving orders from an outside force, and if they were able to sever the Omniums from said force, could they be shut down? It was precisely this line of thinking that led to an attack on the Detroit Omnium as a joint operation between the CAF, Overwatch, and the United States Army. This is just one of many places that Overwatch was deployed, and as such, Overwatch started gaining victories, which galvanized support for the organization. And then soon, The strike team was given an army of its own to support it. It would be 8 months after the start of the war that the tides of battle were beginning to turn in humanity's favor. At least it was in Canada and the United States. This, however, was false hope. Inside human-controlled areas, life went on as best as it could, but in the wider theater, Anubis was far from being defeated. Any tactic, any strategy, any new weapon humanity was deploying, Anubis was finding a way to counter it. For example, Russia would deploy Zenyatta mechs, which in turn were countered by Anubis' titans, which led to many of these human power mechs being utterly destroyed. There was only 2 outcomes: annihilation or victory. It was by chance, however, that a glimmer of salvation would be found. Every Omnic on Earth was under the control of Anubis, bar one.
My friends, when I was born, I was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by the sudden rush of senses, emotions, choices. I was excited, alive. It was frightening. But I found in facing fear, there is freedom. And through freedom, you can find your own path. I have chosen to share the discovery with you. A new beginning. I wish I could stay. You have this one life. Choose well.
You have this one life.
Choose well.
Choose well.
This was Aurora. Due to Aurora being fully sentient, she was immune to the Anubis directives. So, it was theorized that if Anubis could connect to all Omnics, maybe Aurora could do the same. Using a transmitter, they could replicate Aurora's consciousness and transmit it into every Omnic on the planet. However, this would come at the cost of Aurora's life. But in this moment, Aurora would become the mother of all Omnics. And as she connected with every Omnic on the planet, she would say these words.
Alive. It was frightening. But I found in facing fear, there is freedom. And through freedom, you can find your own path. I have chosen to share the discovery with you. A new beginning. I wish I could stay. You have this one life. Choose well.
Aurora's sacrifice would take effect immediately. Having given free will to Omnics, some Omnics chose to lay down their weapons, some continued to fight for Anubis by their own free will, and others were enraged that they had been enslaved by an AI and actually took up arms to fight Anubis alongside humanity. It was this moment that would be known as the Awakening, and it was the key point in turning the tide of battle. Taking advantage of the moment, Overwatch would launch a counter-offensive against Anubis. The war would continue for some time, but for the remainder, humanity had the advantage. Counter-strikes and attacks led to the collapse of Anubis loyalists, and in highly secretive and dangerous raids, Overwatch targeted Anubis' command and control protocols, utterly destroying them completely. In what would be the last major operation of the Omnic War, Overwatch infiltrated Anubis' facility in Cairo, rendering the God program inert and by extension all of its forces. Months later, the war was over. With all the surviving Omnics, humanity would strike peace, and many peace accords would be signed. Bastion units that had served Anubis during the war were rounded up and destroyed, besides one. And the Ravager units, which are the same make as Ramattra, were hunted to near extinction. The crisis would change the global landscape, and a financial crisis was experienced in the war's aftermath. By the war's end, over 1 billion humans had been killed, and 30 million children had been left orphaned. Even over 2 decades later, a significant number of people who survived the conflict struggled with PTSD, and a great number of books were written on the war's history. Numerous groups, including mercenary organizations, were left poised to profit from the war's aftermath. In the United States alone, millions were left displaced and were forced to find new places to live, or at least steady work. Celebrated as the saviors, Overwatch enjoyed a meteoric rise in power, prominence, funding, and their research led to an era of countless technological and medical advancements. It continued to operate after the war before being disbanded due to a series of scandals. After the war, there was one question, the Omnic question. Humanity had these robots to help make their life better, and now the machines who once fought against them now are sentient just like them. As noted by Dr. Liao, humanity as a whole adapted remarkably quickly to the presence of sentient robots in their midst. But of course, along with this, brings about a whole new form of prejudice. Australia is one such example. As Omnics were given land within the outback, it would lead to the creation of the Australian Liberation Front, which sparked civil unrest that led to the Omnium's destruction and consequently irradiation of the country's centre. To the ALF and their descendants, the Omnic Crisis had never ended. Sometime after this event, the United Nations would grant all Omnics legal personhood. However, legal issues within countries continued to persist. Decades after the war, the UN's limitations on AI research remained, just in case another sentient one were to emerge. To Liao's dismay, tension between humans and Omnics worsened as time went on. The more human Omnics became, the more hatred they received. Even after 25 years, tensions between Omnics and humans remained high due to the crisis, and tensions reached an even higher peak after the assassination of Takata Mondata. Tensions were so high in King's Row, and Russia had found itself in the midst of a second crisis. Discrimination resulted in the creation of Null Sector, an Omnic extremist group that would plunge the world into war nearly 30 years after the first Omnic crisis had begun. But in other places, such as Numbani, human and Omnic tensions didn't seem to exist. It was here that the two peoples could live together in peace. There is so much to dive into with the Omnic crisis. This battle that killed 1 billion people, easily the most devastating war in the history of Overwatch. And if it wasn't for Overwatch, all of humanity would be extinct. And then the lasting effects of the war, people still suffering with PTSD, not knowing whether to trust Omnics, even now that they are sentient. There are so many deep themes to this. PTSD, racism, and denial. So many people across the world refusing to believe that Omnics are now just like them, living, feeling beings, and only seeing them as the war machines they once were. Things like this is what I wish were explored more in Overwatch. But I know the massive details of the Omnic Crisis are kept vague in order to allow the fanbase to develop their own theories. I'd love to see a full animated series going over this point in Overwatch's universe. Because let's be real, it is still one of the most interesting things about Overwatch. But hey, that does it for the Omnic Crisis. If you did enjoy this video, do subscribe to the channel for all the Overwatch lore you could ever need. This is sort of our first Overwatch lore video going over a point in time, and less so a character in general. Overwatch was an organization of soldiers, scientists, and heroes. They were acknowledged globally as heroes of peace who put an end to the Omnic Crisis. The organization was on top of the world. But on one fateful night, the golden age of Overwatch would be ended by one single bullet.
All right, Gabriel. Start from the beginning.
We arrived in the Venice safe house and set up surveillance on the manor. We executed our plan under cover of darkness. You sure you want to hear about this, Jack?
You haven't left me much choice.
Whatever happened to plausible deniability?
A little late for that. Tell me what actually happened.
Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. My name is al-g-man, and today I want to take you on another little adventure into the past of Overwatch with another key event. A key point in Overwatch's history that led to its inevitable downfall. Today, we are going to take a look at the Venice incident. We start off with a little bit of background. 10 years ago to the present day in Overwatch, we go to a Blackwatch facility in Rome. Members Cole Cassidy, Gabriel Reyes, and Gerard Lacroix are looking into a businessman by the name of Antonio Bartolotti. Intel gives them information that the businessman is affiliated with Talon. Gabriel, Cassidy, and Gerard are looking to take him down. While in the facility, they are talking about their plan to take him down. Something is going on in the shadows. An undercover Talon agent is setting a bomb. Leading up to this, there was already a series of Talon attacks on Overwatch facilities, most notably in Oslo. This is the reason Blackwatch are looking into Antonio, as they believe it was him who coordinated these attacks. While they'll discuss what they're going to do, Cassidy stating that if Talon can hit them from the shadows, so can Blackwatch. But Gerard is for bringing him out of the shadows and into the light so that it can be done by the book. Reyes shakes Gerard's hand and says it's always a pleasure working with him. Himself and Cassidy would leave the facility. And as they are outside, on the steps, the bomb would detonate. Immediately, Cassidy and Reyes would rush into the building to help find any survivors. Lying amongst the rubble and the flames, they would find Gerard Lacroix, unconscious but alive. He would be brought to Overwatch headquarters in Switzerland, where Angela Ziegler would look after him. In a conversation with Jack Morrison, while the two were placing flags on coffins, they would talk about Antonio. Reyes would plead for Blackwatch to go in and secure Antonio, while Jack Morrison would state that they need to stay by the book and do it properly. In the end, while Jack would tell him he can't officially sanction something like this, he left a final call to Reyes, but before would say, ask yourself, in the long run, will this help Overwatch keep the world safe? Reyes would tell him no one will even know Blackwatch was there. So himself, Cole Cassidy, Moira O'Dearn, and Genji Shimada would head to Venice to apprehend Antonio Bartolotti. The Blackwatch team would arrive in Venice at a safe house and set up surveillance on the manor in which Antonio was residing. They quickly found out that Talon were patrolling everywhere. Originally, they would plan to infiltrate the manor by posing as a band employed at the manor, but this idea would not be followed upon. So, when night fell, they would stealthily infiltrate the manor, making their way to Antonio's office. On their way there, they would kill or incapacitate numerous Talon guards. This whole mission depended on their stealth. It was meant to be easy. In, grab Antonio, and get out. Upon reaching Antonio's office, they found him there. However, he was not surprised to see them, nor was he intimidated. In fact, Antonio was pretty smug.
Businessman? Even if you take me now, my friends would have me released within the week. All this theatrics have been a waste of our time.
And he was pointing out that Overwatch abducting a respected businessman would be a public relations nightmare. And he would point out that even if they did take him, his friends within the government would have him released within a week. These words struck at Reyes personally. He reflected on it for only a moment, saying, "You're right, it would happen that way. He'd be out in a week, and Overwatch would just come under scrutiny." So, with those words,
you're right.
he would shoot Antonio. The force of this blast would send Antonio straight through his office window. It was this bullet, this shot, this murder that triggered everything to go wrong. In the short term, a bunch of alarms would ring off, essentially stirring the hornet's nest and alerting Talon to Blackwatch's presence, leaving them with Plan B to fight their way out. But in the long run, this would have a devastating impact on Overwatch's reputation all across the globe. Fighting their way through the streets of Venice, taking out numerous Talon guards, the Blackwatch team would successfully exfiltrate the site and return to base. But this was only the beginning. When they returned to base, Cassidy and Reyes were debriefed by Morrison, Anna Amari, and Gerard Lacroix. Morrison was incensed by what had occurred and demanded that Reyes tell him what actually happened. Plausible deniability be damned. Reyes would snidely respond to Morrison's demands, but nevertheless would recount the entire Rialto mission. In his debrief, he would point out that things didn't always go to plan and stood by the decisions he made during the mission. As a result, Blackwatch were put on suspension. This was the beginning of the end. Antonio's warning about the public relations issue almost seemed like a prophecy. Because of this mission, because of how it ended, Blackwatch was now known to the public. Up until this point, nobody knew Blackwatch even existed, and now Blackwatch was everywhere, and everything Blackwatch had done was starting to become public. There were stories of assassinations, coercion, kidnappings, torture, or even things more worse. Governments all around the world were calling on the UN to shut down the aggressive and repeated violations of many countries' sovereignty. The UN would launch a special and lengthy, highly secretive investigation into these claims. And as this investigation proceeded, public distrust swelled. The investigations would reveal the existence of Odirin's illicit research within Overwatch, causing Overwatch to disavow any knowledge of her. Due to all this, Blackwatch would be placed on suspension 1 year later. And the worst part about this all, Antonio's death had no effect on Talon whatsoever. New faces stepped up to fill the void left by Antonio's death, including Maximilian and Akande Ogundimu, better known as Doomfist. Cassidy would reflect on this moment.
We were out there. New faces stepped up to fill the void in Talon. And I can't help but wonder if that's where it all started to go wrong.
And he'd be right. Overwatch would begin to enter its twilight years, and due to Reyes' actions, the golden age of Overwatch was put down. This truly is one of the most pivotal moments in Overwatch's history. During the Omnic Crisis, Overwatch were hailed as heroes, saviors, the group of people who ended the war. But now, they were catching fire from every corner of the globe, all due to one man dying. That does it for the Venice incident. Truly one of the most interesting things in the Overwatch history. A key point that deals not only with Overwatch, but Blackwatch, which is a highly interesting faction that myself and many more people want to see explored. Hopefully going forward in the future we get a bit more lore on Blackwatch, a bit more look into Blackwatch, and who knows, maybe sometime down the line we get another little PvE event dealing with a Blackwatch team. But for now, if you did enjoy this video, hit that subscribe button. If you haven't already, check out the video on the Omnic Crisis. It is by far our longest and most in-depth video on anything to do with Overwatch. So make sure you check that video out now, and then check out the Overwatch lore playlist for lore on all your favorite Overwatch characters. Once again, my name is al-g-man. I love you. Stay safe. And this has been the Venice Incident.